Hi folks, Paula MacLean, and this is a video post about change and transition. I really want to spend a few minutes with you talking about the difference between change and transition, and I'm going to be doing a full-length video in a few weeks on this particular topic. So this is kind of a quick look at some of the things that you need to consider as a not-for-profit leader when you are in the process of creating organizational change. And I want to talk a little bit first about that change management is one of the most important kinds of skill sets for managers, supervisors, executive directors, and even boards of directors to some degree to have in their toolkit. And we have lots of opportunity to practice change inside not-for-profit organizations, but very often we find ourselves kind of behind the eight ball in terms of taking things that are coming at us from the outside perhaps, or things that we have chosen to do internally, and we are behind that eight ball because we often lack the change management skills to be able to orchestrate, to create, and to roll out change in a positive and kind of productive way. And we have a tendency to kind of fly by the seat of our pants and kind of just to do what makes sense. I've noticed a couple of things that is really common inside not-for-profit organizations when change is happening. The first of all, sometimes we don't do enough advanced planning. We don't have enough meetings, have enough conversations about what are we changing and how are we changing and what its impact will be on people. And we kind of tend to just kind of fly by the seat of our pants, roll it out, make it happen. And sometimes that change is kind of stuff that comes at us from the outside, so we are under some time pressures. But it's really, really important for you as a not-for-profit leader to be thinking about the impact that that change has had on people. And the second thing that I see is that we do lots of planning. So the reverse of the first problem, we do lots of planning, but in the implementation of that, we underestimate the impact that it's going to have on people. And we do enough work around supporting people and planning for the support of people who are going to be impacted by the change. Now I want to talk a little bit about change management, and I hope I'll hit a few little light bulbs for you in this process. And again, this is just a really quick overview of change and transition, and I'm going to spend some more time on it in another video. First of all, change management isn't really about change. Changes are an event or a series of events. And so very often we spend our time planning those events and rolling them out and communicating them is usually part of what we do. Change management is really about transition management. And for a second, it might seem like I'm kind of splitting hairs on this. We tend to use the word change and the word transition almost interchangeably. And we'll say, you know, we're in the middle of a transition process or we're in the middle of a change process. And it's almost like we mean the same thing. But really, transition is about the impact that the changes, which are an event or series of events, that the impact that those changes have on people. And those people can be your employees, they can be your volunteers, they can be the people that your organization serves. And so a man who's far wiser than I wrote a really cool book, and the book is called Managing Transitions. The author of the book is William Bridges, and he talks about the difference of transition management and change management, and we tend to think about transition too little, and change management we tend to spend a lot of time orchestrating the actual things that will change. So those are kind of the fundamental differences that are between change and transition. So in other words, just in a nutshell, transition is what happens after change occurs. So when we start the ball rolling and a series of events happen, that's change, and then it impacts on people, and what they have to go through is transition. So you can see really clearly that one of the things we have to do as managers and supervisors, executive directors, we have to focus on the whole idea of transition management, not just change management. The driver of people's reaction to change is in fact their learning history. It's not really about the change itself, although what is changing and how it is changing can certainly cause either a positive or a negative impact for people. But the real driver is our learning experiences. So this explains why we can treat actually can take a relatively small change, or what management often thinks is a relatively small change, and we'll have a whole spectrum of reactions to that change. So if we have 10 employees, let's say, and we have only one change happening, let's suppose we change something little, like we change the timesheets that everybody has to fill out. We can have a whole range of responses, from one person saying, darn well about time we changed those timesheets, and they need to be better, and they were confusing, and we had too many of them, and so we need to change those, all the way through to, this is my own personal experience in an organization where I was a manager, people squirreling away the old timesheets so they could continue to fill those out and refusing to use the new ones. So we have out and out acceptance and endorsement of the change, and all the way through, and all the in-between reactions as well, all the way through to some people saying, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to refuse to do it. I'm not going to buy into it at all. Now, when I'm teaching change and transition management to managers and supervisors, here are the two common questions they ask. First of all, they say, how do I get buy-in after we announce that changes are going to happen? And the second question they ask is, how do we overcome people's resistance to change? And sometimes that resistance is really quite practical, like my example of people squirreling away old timesheets and refusing to fill out the new ones. And sometimes it's more philosophical, it's more emotional. So those are the two questions. How do we get people to buy in? And secondly, how do we overcome the resistance? The two of them are kind of different versions of each other. And the reality is this: buy-in after the fact, after change is been announced and it's been engineered and it's all put together and we've communicated that something is changing, buy-in is very difficult to get after the fact. And the lack of buy-in can slow down the change management process incredibly. So it's really important to create buy-in, but we have to create it not after the change, but before the change. And resistance is even harder to overcome than lack of buy-in, because resistance, as the word implies, is people digging their heels in and absolutely refusing to go along with a new way of work, new program, and new initiative. And so people dig in, and they're often in cliques, they're often in groups at the coffee table, they're often, in the parking lot, online, Facebooking, Twittering, and having a whole another conversation around what is changing, and there's active resistance to that. So I want to talk in just a little short form about a better approach. First of all, and this comes directly from William Bridges' model, he says really clearly, if we sell the problem or opportunity that the change is supposed to address, that we will in fact create the buy-in before the change even happens. So in other words, if the change is in response to something that needs to get fixed and people understand the problem, or if the change is in response to perhaps some new funding that's on the horizon, or a new opportunity for programs and services, and people understand that what we have to change is related to an opportunity that we have, then the change makes sense to people, and they say, that is absolutely okay with me. Or I might have some concerns about it, but I'm going to buy in because I understand that the problem has to be fixed, or I understand that this opportunity cannot be bypassed, that there's a great opportunity for our organization. So the supporting of the changes doesn't come after the changes are made, it actually comes before. And as you roll out the change and as you communicate the change, there's already an understanding that this change has a context. Now, some people will say that process of input prior to change, of discussion and communication prior to change, actually really slows down the change process. Well, I would rather slow it down at the front end and have positive conversations around why this needs to change, how it needs to change, etc., and create input and buy-in at the front end, because it's far more positive than have to spend a whole bunch of time trying to convince people individually and in group meetings and by emails and other communication. I don't want to do that after the change has been rolled out, because those conversations tend not to be too pleasant. They don't tend to be very much fun. So, if it makes it slower at the front end, I'm in favor of that, because it's the same amount of time. If I have to spend 3 weeks at the front end, it's a far more positive 3 weeks than I have to spend 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks at the back end convincing people to change. And one of the things that happens is that the conversation changes inside the organization. So rather than those parking lot meetings and online meetings and coffee table meetings being, what the heck are they doing to us and why is this happening? The conversation changes to something far more positive. Is I understand that we have this problem, and that problem has to be addressed. In order to address that problem, we have to fix things, we have to do things differently, and that's going to cause change to have happen. Now, there's no magic bullet in change and transition management, but this makes a huge difference in how people respond to the change once it happens. Input prior rather than feedback afterwards is a huge and powerful tool, and selling the problem rather than selling the change creates buy-in in the early days. So, thanks for listening. It's been a great opportunity to share with you some ideas around change and transition management. Watch out for the longer video that's going to talk about the details and specifics in this. And my name is Paula MacLean, and I'm your leadership coach. Bye for now.